Welcome to Bookish English 2. What if one story could teach you powerful life lessons and improve your English at the same time? Today, you will experience a deep story where emotions, choices, and money change everything. And as you listen, your brain will start thinking in English naturally. Stay with me till the end, because this is not just a story, it is a real learning experience. If you miss this, you miss a powerful way to grow your English and your mindset together. Chapter 1. The Quiet Country House. The Clarkson family lived in a quiet part of the countryside near Cambridge, where life moved slowly and the world felt far away from noise and trouble, and their large old house stood surrounded by a wide garden full of flowers, tall trees, and long paths that seemed to carry memories of many years. Anyone who looked at the house from the outside would think that it was a place of peace and comfort because everything appeared calm and beautiful. Yet inside that house, there were feelings that no one could see at first glance, feelings that stayed hidden behind polite words and quiet faces. On a warm Thursday morning in July, when the air was heavy and the sun was already strong, Jackie walked into the house from the garden, her steps slow and steady, as if she was carrying not just the heat of the day, but also something deeper inside her mind. She was a tall woman, strong in body, yet her eyes showed a kind of tiredness that does not come from physical work, but from thoughts that stay with a person for too long and refuse to leave. She wore a brown skirt and a yellow shirt, even though the weather was too hot for such clothes, but she did not seem to notice. Because sometimes people are so lost in their thoughts that even simple things like comfort no longer matter. She moved into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and watched it quietly for a moment before drinking, as if she needed more than just water to feel calm. Just as she lifted the glass, the telephone rang, and the sharp sound broke the silence of the house in a sudden and almost uncomfortable way, making the moment feel tense without any clear reason. Jackie walked to the phone and answered it without hurry, her voice steady and simple, but there was something in her tone that suggested she already knew who it might be. On the other side was Diane, her younger sister, who lived far away in London and who always seemed to bring a different kind of energy into the house, even through a simple phone call. Diane did not waste time with greetings or warmth, and she asked to speak to their mother immediately, as if everything else was unimportant. Jackie told her that their mother was not at home and had gone to the doctor, and although she said it calmly, the conversation quickly began to feel uncomfortable because Diane's questions were direct, and her voice carried a cold edge that made it clear she had a purpose for calling. After a short pause, Diane explained that she wanted to visit for the weekend, but did not have enough money for the train ticket, and her words were simple but heavy, because they were not new, and they carried a familiar pattern that Jackie had seen many times before. Jackie felt a quiet frustration rise inside her, and although she tried to control her tone, it was clear that she did not like what she was hearing, because in her mind, Diane was always asking for money and never taking responsibility for her own life. She reminded Diane that their mother had already given her money many times, but Diane did not respond with emotion or apology, and instead she spoke in a cold and practical way, saying that the call was expensive and asking Jackie to simply pass the message. When the call ended, the silence in the kitchen felt heavier than before, as if the words had stayed behind and filled the room with something uncomfortable. Jackie slowly put the phone down, took out a cigarette, and lit it with careful movements. And as she breathed out the smoke, it seemed as though she was trying to release the frustration that had been building inside her for a long time. Diane, who was only 20 years old, lived alone in a small room in London and dreamed of becoming a singer. And although she had a beautiful voice, her dreams had not yet become reality. And without work or stability, she depended on her mother's money to continue living the life she wanted, which created a silent tension in the family that was never openly resolved. Jackie returned to the kitchen table and began preparing sandwiches, her hands moving automatically while her mind stayed busy with thoughts about her sister and the situation that never seemed to change. and just as she was finishing, the back door opened and their mother Molly walked in. Molly removed her hat and placed it on the table, her movements calm and controlled, and there was something in her presence that always made the room feel different because she carried a quiet strength that did not need to be spoken. She was a tall woman with dark hair and striking eyes, and although she looked composed, there was a distance in her expression that suggested she did not easily share her thoughts or feelings with others. Two large black dogs followed her into the kitchen, moving quickly toward her with excitement and loyalty, and she sat down and placed her hands gently on their heads, and for a moment she seemed peaceful, as if the world outside her thoughts did not exist. Jackie placed the sandwiches on the table and told her about Diane's phone call, explaining that she needed money for the train ticket, and Molly listened without interruption, her eyes closing briefly, as if she was thinking deeply, or perhaps trying to avoid the weight of the situation. Instead of answering directly, Molly stood up and began speaking about preparing the house for the weekend, giving instructions in a calm voice that did not reveal her true feelings, and she also asked Jackie to go to the village later to collect her tablets, which made the conversation feel as if it had been quietly moved away from something uncomfortable. Jackie agreed, but before Molly could leave the room, she mentioned another important matter, and her tone changed slightly as she spoke about Peter Hobbs, a young man who had come to the house earlier that day and who was extremely angry because of something Molly had done. Jackie explained that Peter had lost his job and blamed Molly for it, and although Molly responded calmly and said she did not want to speak to him, Jackie felt that the situation was more serious than her mother realized. She stepped forward slightly and told her that Peter was not just angry, but had said something dangerous, something that could not be ignored, and as the words left her mouth, the air in the room seemed to grow still. She told her that Peter had said he wanted to kill her. The sentence hung in the space between them, heavy and impossible to ignore, yet Molly did not react in the way one might expect because she did not show fear or shock, and instead she simply opened the door and walked out without saying anything more. Her silence felt stronger than any response, and it left Jackie standing there with a feeling she could not fully understand because it was not just about the words that had been spoken, but about everything that had not been said. The house, which had seemed so peaceful in the morning, no longer felt the same because now there was something hidden inside it, something quiet but dangerous, and although nothing had happened yet, it felt as if the calm surface of the family's life had already begun to break. Chapter 2. Money problems begin. The house did not feel the same after that phone call, even though nothing had visibly changed, because sometimes a simple conversation can quietly shift the air inside a place. And Jackie felt that shift as she stood alone in the kitchen, thinking about Diane's words and the familiar pattern that followed her like a shadow. She tried to focus on her work, arranging the sandwiches neatly and cleaning the table. Yet her mind refused to stay still, and it kept returning to the same question that had troubled her for a long time, which was why everything in this family seemed to come back to money. It was not just about small needs or simple help, because the problem had grown into something deeper, something that touched every relationship in the house, and although no one said it openly, everyone seemed to feel it in their own way. Diane's life in London was far from easy, but it was also far from simple, because she lived between dreams and reality, and she held on to her dream of becoming a singer with a strong belief that one day, everything would change. She spent her days practicing, meeting people and searching for opportunities, yet success did not come as quickly as she had hoped, and as time passed, her dependence on her mother's money became stronger instead of weaker. She did not see it as a weakness, because in her mind, she was simply using the support available to her while she followed her passion. But from Jackie's point of view, it looked very different, and it felt unfair, almost like a quiet burden that only some members of the family carried. Jackie moved slowly through the house, checking the rooms, opening windows to let in fresh air, and preparing everything for the weekend because her mother had asked her to do so, and she always followed her instructions without question. However, as she worked, she could not ignore the feeling that something was building beneath the surface, and it was not just about Diane anymore because the problem was larger than one person. and it was connected to every member of the family in different ways. She knew that when everyone arrived for the weekend, the house would no longer be quiet, and the calm space would be filled with voices, opinions, and expectations that would not easily stay hidden. Later that afternoon, the heat of the day began to soften, but the tension inside Jackie did not fade. And when she left the house to go to the village, she carried her thoughts with her as if they were part of her. The road was quiet, with only the sound of her footsteps and the distant movement of the wind through the trees. Yet even in that peaceful moment, she could not find rest, because her mind kept returning to the same worries. She collected the tablets from the shop, spoke politely to the shopkeeper, and then began walking back. But just as she reached the road near the house, she saw someone standing there, waiting. It was Peter Hobbs. He stood beside his old car, his posture tense and his face marked by frustration that had not yet found a place to rest. He was young, only 17, and there was something raw in his expression, something that made his anger feel real and dangerous at the same time. Jackie slowed her steps slightly, not out of fear, but because she could sense that this was not going to be a simple conversation. Peter looked at her as she approached, and although he tried to control himself, his voice carried a sharp edge when he spoke. "Is she at home?" he asked without greeting, without any softness in his tone. Jackie understood immediately who he meant, and she felt a small tension in her chest because she knew this moment could not be avoided forever. "Yes," she said carefully, "but she does not want to see you." Peter let out a short, bitter laugh, and it was not the kind of laugh that came from humor, but from anger that had been waiting too long. "Of course she doesn't," he said, his eyes fixed on the ground for a moment before he looked back at Jackie. "She writes one letter, just one letter, and everything is gone. My job, my chance, everything." Jackie did not answer immediately, because she did not know what to say that would make any difference, and sometimes silence feels safer than words that might only make things worse. Peter stepped closer, and although he did not raise his voice, the intensity in his words made them feel louder than they were. "I worked hard for that job," he continued, "and then she decided to tell them about my past, as if I had no right to change, as if one mistake means I should lose everything." There was pain in his voice now, not just anger, and for a moment Jackie saw something more than just a young man shouting in frustration. She saw someone who felt hurt and powerless, someone who believed that his future had been taken away from him without mercy. She wanted to say something that could calm him, something that could bring the moment back to a safer place, but the words did not come easily. "She thought she was doing the right thing," Jackie said finally, though even as she spoke she knew that those words would not satisfy him. Peter shook his head slowly, and his expression grew darker. "The right thing?" he repeated. "No, that was not the right thing. That was her decision, and now I have to live with it." He paused, and then his voice dropped slightly, becoming quieter but more dangerous. "Tell her I want to speak to her, and if she refuses again, I will not stay quiet." Jackie felt a cold sensation move through her, because there was something in his tone that made his words feel serious, not just emotional, and although she wanted to believe that he was only speaking in anger, she could not ignore the possibility that his feelings might lead him further than he intended. "I will tell her," she said, her voice steady, even though her thoughts were not. Peter looked at her for a moment longer, then stepped back and turned away, as if the conversation had taken everything from him that he could give in that moment. Jackie continued walking toward the house, but her steps felt heavier now, because she carried more than just her mother's tablets in her hand. She carried the weight of everything that was building around her, the tension between family and outsiders, the quiet anger that moved from one person to another, and the growing sense that something was not right. When she entered the house again, the silence felt different from before, because now it was not peaceful, but waiting, as if the house itself was holding its breath for something that had not yet happened. Jackie placed the tablets on the table and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet, and although nothing moved, she felt that the calm would not last much longer, because when people carry too many unresolved feelings, the silence between them becomes more dangerous than noise. And somewhere deep inside her, a thought began to form, slow but clear, that this weekend would not be like any other, and that whatever was coming, it would not be easy to stop once it began. Chapter 3. A tense family dinner. By the time Saturday evening arrived, the house that had once felt quiet and distant from the world was no longer calm because the presence of the family slowly filled every room with voices, movement, and something deeper that could not be seen but could easily be felt. The long day had been warm, and as the sun began to lower in the sky, a soft golden light touched the garden and the old walls of the house, making everything look peaceful from the outside. Yet inside, the atmosphere was far from relaxed. Jackie stood near the window, watching the road with a quiet focus, as if she was preparing herself for what was about to come. And when she saw a car moving slowly toward the house, she knew that the final piece of the evening had arrived. The car stopped near the front door, and a tall man stepped out, moving with the slight heaviness of someone who was tired but still trying to appear cheerful. It was Albert, Molly's brother-in-law, and although he carried a polite smile on his face, there was something in his eyes that suggested worry and pressure. Jackie opened the door to welcome him, and he entered with quick apologies about being late, his voice light but his words slightly rushed, as if he was trying to keep the moment simple. Molly was already waiting in the sitting room, dressed carefully in a long black dress, her appearance elegant and controlled, and when Albert greeted her, he tried to bring warmth into the conversation. But Molly's response remained calm and distant, as if she was already holding back something she did not want to show. Soon, everyone gathered around the table, and the dinner began with polite words and small smiles. Yet beneath those simple moments, something uncomfortable moved quietly between them. Diane sat with a natural confidence, her beauty and style drawing attention without effort, and she spoke easily, complimenting the table and the flowers, but her tone carried a subtle sharpness that made her words feel less warm than they sounded. Roger sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes careful, and it was clear that he was observing more than he was saying, as if he was measuring each moment before deciding how to respond. As the food was served and the conversation continued, Albert mentioned meeting Peter Hobbs on the road, and the name immediately brought a shift in the atmosphere, because it was not just a simple detail, but a reminder of something unresolved and uncomfortable. Jackie spoke quickly, trying to soften the situation, explaining that Peter was simply angry because he had lost his job. But Albert's words suggested that the anger was directed more deeply at Molly herself. And although Molly said nothing, her silence spoke loudly enough for everyone to feel it. The conversation moved forward, yet it did not truly leave the subject behind, because once tension enters a room, it does not disappear easily. Albert soon began speaking about his wife Annie, and his tone changed as he described her illness, which had grown worse over time, leaving her weak and dependent on constant care. His words were calm, but the emotion behind them was clear, because he was not only sharing information, but also expressing a quiet need, a request that he did not fully say but that everyone understood. He spoke about the cost of care and the difficulty of the situation, and although he did not directly ask for money, the meaning behind his words was strong enough to reach Molly without being spoken openly. Molly listened with her eyes partly closed, and when she responded, her voice was controlled, yet there was a slight tension in it, as if the subject touched something she did not want to face. The conversation could have ended there, but it did not, because Albert pushed a little further, reminding Molly of her connection to Annie, and suggesting that she had a responsibility to help, and although his words were not aggressive, they carried a quiet pressure that made the moment heavier. Molly responded with a short answer, moving the conversation away from the topic. But the damage had already been done, because the tension had deepened, and everyone at the table could feel it. Diane then brought the attention back to herself in a smooth and almost effortless way, speaking about her dress and her life in London, and for a moment, the mood seemed lighter, yet that feeling did not last long, because her words soon returned to the subject that had already filled the room. She spoke about needing more money, not just for daily life, but for a bigger dream, as she wanted to travel to America and continue her journey as a singer. Her voice carried confidence, but there was also an expectation in it, as if she believed that her request would be accepted without question. Roger responded with a quiet refusal, his tone calm but firm, and his words carried a sense of frustration that had clearly been building over time. He spoke about responsibility and the need for Diane to find her own path, and although he did not raise his voice, the message was clear. Diane laughed softly, as if his words did not affect her, and she replied with a confidence that felt almost cold, saying that she did not need his help because their mother would always support her. The words were simple, but they struck deeply because they touched something that was already sensitive in the room. Jackie watched her mother closely at that moment, and she noticed a change in her expression, a small shift that others might have missed, but one that carried meaning. Molly's face had lost its calm appearance, and there was a tension in her eyes that suggested something stronger was rising beneath the surface. Jackie felt a quiet worry, because she wanted the evening to remain peaceful, yet she could sense that it was moving in a different direction. As the conversation continued, the topic of the house and the land came into discussion, and Roger spoke about the size of the property and the work it required, suggesting that it might be better to make changes for the future. His words were careful, but the meaning behind them was clear, because he saw opportunity where others saw tradition, and he wanted to move forward in a way that would benefit him. Molly reacted strongly to this idea, her voice rising slightly as she defended her home and her connection to the garden, and it became clear that this was not just a place to her, but a part of her identity, something she was not willing to give up. The air in the room grew heavier with each passing moment, and what had begun as a family dinner slowly turned into something else, something more complicated and more difficult to control. Jackie tried to keep things balanced, offering food and drinks, moving the conversation when she could, but even her efforts could not fully hide the truth that had become impossible to ignore. Each person at the table carried their own desires, their own needs, and their own frustrations, and although they were connected by family, they were also divided by something much stronger. And as the evening moved forward, it became clear that this dinner was not just a simple gathering, but the beginning of something that had been waiting to reveal itself for a long time, something that would not stay hidden much longer. Chapter 4: Words That Hurt Deeply. The dinner did not end when the plates were empty, because the real weight of the evening had nothing to do with food, and everything to do with the words that had been spoken and the feelings that could no longer stay hidden. The room felt warmer than before, even though the windows were open, and the air that moved inside carried a strange heaviness that no one could ignore. Jackie stood near the table, trying to keep her movements calm and natural, but her mind was alert, watching every face, every small reaction, as if she could feel that something important was about to happen. Molly sat quietly at first, her hands resting on the table, her posture straight, and her expression controlled. Yet there was a tension building inside her that had not yet found a voice, and it showed in the way her eyes moved slowly from one person to another, as if she was searching for something she could no longer find. For a moment, there was silence, and it was not a peaceful silence, but the kind that comes before something breaks. Then Roger spoke again about the house, and although his tone was calm, his words carried the same idea that had already caused discomfort earlier, and this time they seemed to reach Molly in a different way. He spoke about the size of the property, about the work it required, and about the future, suggesting that change might be necessary. And even though he tried to sound reasonable, there was an underlying sense that his thoughts were not only practical but also personal. Molly looked at him, and something in her expression changed, because she no longer saw just her son speaking, but someone who was thinking about her house as an opportunity rather than a home. Her voice, when it came, was no longer calm in the same way. It carried a sharp edge, controlled but firm, as if she had been holding back for too long and could not do so anymore. She spoke about the garden, about the work she did there every day, and about how it gave her peace and purpose. And it became clear that this was not simply a place she lived in, but a part of her life that she refused to lose. The more she spoke, the more her words revealed something deeper, because behind her defense of the house was a feeling that she was being pushed, slowly but steadily, towards something she did not want to accept. Albert tried to bring the conversation back to Annie, reminding Molly again of her responsibility, and although his words were softer this time, they added to the pressure that was already building. Diane sat quietly for a moment, watching everything with careful attention, and then she spoke, and her voice carried a calm confidence that felt almost cold. She repeated what she had said before, that their mother always helped her, and that she knew she would continue to do so. And although her words were simple, they struck deeply because they suggested something that Molly could no longer ignore, which was that her role in the family had slowly become tied to money rather than love. Jackie felt the moment slipping away, and she tried to bring some balance back into the room by offering more food and drink, by speaking in a lighter tone, and by moving around as if everything was still normal. But even she could not stop what was coming, because sometimes the truth pushes itself forward no matter how much we try to hold it back. Molly suddenly stood up, and the movement was enough to make everyone stop and look at her, because it carried a finality that could not be misunderstood. Her face had changed completely, and the calm control she had shown earlier was gone, replaced by something raw and honest that had been hidden for a long time. "I know why you are all here," she said, and her voice was clear, strong, and filled with emotion that no one had expected to hear so openly. "You do not come to see me. You do not come because you love me. You come for my money." The words fell into the room like a heavy weight, and for a moment, no one moved, because there was nothing simple that could be said in response. Jackie felt her heart tighten, because she had never heard her mother speak like this before, and although part of her wanted to deny it, another part knew that there was truth in those words. Roger looked down, his face tense, as if he wanted to speak but could not find the right way to do it. Diane did not look surprised, but her eyes grew colder, and Albert shifted slightly in his chair, uncomfortable but unable to argue. Molly continued, and now there was no attempt to hide what she felt. She spoke about the house, about the garden, and about the years she had spent building her life there, and she made it clear that she would not give it away simply because others wanted it. Her voice grew stronger with each sentence, and the pain behind her words became impossible to ignore. "You can all wait," she said firmly. "No one is getting my money while I am alive." Jackie stepped forward, her voice filled with emotion as she tried to stop the moment from going too far. "Mother, please do not say that," she said, because she could see how deeply the words were affecting everyone, and she did not want the evening to end in this way. But Molly did not respond to her in the way she had hoped, because once the truth had been spoken, it could not simply be taken back. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved closer, and the air was heavy with everything that had been revealed. Molly stood there for a moment longer, her breathing slightly uneven, and then she spoke again, her voice quieter but still firm, saying that she felt unwell and needed to rest. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving the room in silence. No one followed her. The sound of her footsteps faded as she went upstairs, and what remained behind was not just silence, but something deeper, something that stayed in the space between the people who were still sitting at the table. For a few seconds, no one spoke, because they were all thinking, and perhaps for the first time, they were seeing the situation more clearly than before. Then Diane broke the silence, and her voice was quiet, almost too calm, but the words she spoke carried a sharpness that made them impossible to ignore. "One day, I am going to kill that woman," she said. And although it could have been taken as a moment of anger, there was something in the way she said it that made the room feel even colder. Roger looked at her, shocked but silent, because he did not know how to respond to something that felt both unreal and strangely possible. Albert moved slightly, shaking his head as if he did not want to believe what he had heard, yet he did not speak against it either. Jackie stood still, her cigarette forgotten in her hand, and she felt a deep unease settle inside her because she understood that the evening had changed something in the family, something that could not be easily repaired. She forced herself to move, to do something, anything that could bring a sense of normality back into the room, and she suggested coffee, her voice steady but quieter than before. One by one, they stood up and followed her to the kitchen, but the tension did not disappear because it moved with them, staying close, as if it had become part of the house itself. And as the night continued, the words that had been spoken did not fade, because some words do not disappear with time, and instead, they grow stronger, waiting for the moment when their true meaning will be revealed. Chapter 5. A Night of Secrets. The house grew quiet after the dinner, but it was not the kind of quiet that brings peace, because every room seemed to hold the echo of the words that had been spoken earlier, and no one could truly escape them. The lights were softer now, and the shadows stretched longer across the walls, creating a feeling that something unseen was moving slowly through the house. Jackie stood in the kitchen for a moment after everyone had finished their coffee, watching the empty cups and plates as if they could explain what had just happened. Yet the silence around her only made her thoughts louder. She knew that the evening had changed something important, and although everything looked normal again, nothing felt the same. One by one, the family members began to leave the kitchen and move through the house, each carrying their own thoughts, their own frustrations, and their own quiet plans. Roger walked upstairs first, his steps steady but heavy, as if he was thinking deeply about everything that had been said at the table. He was not only thinking about his mother, but also about the future, about the house, and about the possibilities that could open if things were different. And although he did not want to admit it openly, there was a part of him that was already imagining a life without the limits that his mother had placed on him. His mind moved between guilt and desire, and he could not fully settle on either. Diane remained in the kitchen a little longer, sitting quietly with her cup, her expression calm but distant, as if she was looking beyond the walls of the house and into a future that only she could see. Her thoughts were not simple because they carried both anger and ambition, and although she had spoken boldly at dinner, there was something deeper inside her that had not yet been fully revealed. She had always believed that she deserved more freedom, more success, more life, and the idea that her mother could stop her from reaching those things had begun to feel like a barrier she could no longer accept. Albert moved slowly toward the stairs, his shoulders slightly bent, as if the weight of his situation had become too heavy to carry easily. His thoughts were focused on Annie, on her illness, and on the cost of her care, and although he had tried to speak calmly at dinner, his need was real and urgent. He had hoped that Molly would understand, that she would help without resistance, but now he was not so sure, and the uncertainty left him feeling tired and restless at the same time. Jackie stayed behind for a few minutes, cleaning the kitchen, moving quietly from one task to another, as if she was trying to bring order back into a space that no longer felt balanced. She wanted to believe that things would settle, that the morning would bring a sense of calm, but a small voice inside her told her that this was not the case, and that something had already begun to move in a direction she could not control. When she finished, she turned off the lights and walked slowly toward the stairs, her mind still full of questions that had no clear answers. Upstairs, the house felt even quieter, and the sound of footsteps seemed louder in the stillness, as if every movement was being watched by the walls themselves. One by one, the family members found their way to Molly's room, not together but separately, each with their own reason for going. Roger entered first, knocking lightly before stepping inside, and when he saw his mother sitting on the edge of the bed, he paused for a moment, unsure of how to begin. Their conversation was brief, but it carried the same tension that had filled the dinner table, because even in that private moment, they could not escape the distance that had grown between them. Roger tried to speak about the house again, though more gently this time, but Molly's answer remained firm, and it was clear that her decision would not change. After he left, Diane came to the room, carrying a cup of hot milk, her movements calm and careful, as if she was performing a simple act of kindness, yet her eyes held a depth that suggested her thoughts were far from simple. She placed the cup beside the bed and spoke quietly, and although her words were soft, there was something beneath them that Molly could feel, something that had been growing for a long time. Their conversation was short, but it ended without warmth, and when Diane left the room, she closed the door gently, as if she did not want to disturb the silence that remained inside. Albert visited next, and his approach was different because he came with a purpose that he could not hide. He spoke about Annie again, about her condition, about the need for help, and although he tried to remain respectful, his words carried a quiet urgency that made the moment uncomfortable. Molly listened, but her response did not change, and Albert left the room with a heavy feeling in his chest, because he knew that his situation had not improved and that time was not on his side. Jackie came last, and her presence was different from the others, because she did not come to ask for anything, and she did not come to argue. She stood near the door for a moment, watching her mother, and there was a softness in her expression that had not been present earlier. She spoke gently, asking if Molly needed anything, and for a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter and more human. Molly mentioned the dogs, saying that she had forgotten to feed them, and without hesitation she stood up, leaving the room and moving downstairs, her steps slow but steady. The house remained silent as the night deepened, and one by one the lights went out, leaving only darkness and stillness behind. Yet even in that quiet there were small movements, small moments that could easily be missed, but that carried importance beyond their appearance. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed softly, and footsteps moved across the floor, careful and controlled, as if someone did not want to be heard. The kitchen, which had been the center of the evening, now stood empty, yet it held the memory of everything that had happened there, and in that space, something changed, something small but powerful enough to alter the course of what was to come. The night passed slowly, and although everything appeared calm on the surface, there was a quiet tension that did not disappear, because it had moved beyond words and into actions that could not be undone. Each person slept in their own room, yet their thoughts did not rest completely, and somewhere between the silence and the darkness, the house held a secret that no one fully understood. And as the first light of morning began to touch the edges of the garden, the quiet country house stood exactly as it had the day before, yet everything inside it had already changed. Chapter 6: A Shocking Discovery. The morning arrived slowly, and at first it seemed like any other day in the quiet countryside, because the light moved gently across the garden, touching the flowers and the old trees in a calm and familiar way, and the air felt fresh after the long, warm night. For a few moments, everything appeared peaceful again, as if the tension of the previous evening had disappeared with the darkness. Yet this calm did not last, because sometimes the most shocking moments begin in silence, when no one is prepared for what is about to happen. Inside the house, the rooms were still and quiet, and the soft sounds of the morning had not yet reached every corner. But then something broke that silence in a sudden and painful way. A sharp cry came from upstairs, and it carried fear so clearly that it seemed to move through the walls and reach every room at once. Roger opened his eyes immediately, his heart beating faster as he tried to understand what he had heard, and for a second he stayed still, hoping that it was nothing serious, yet the feeling inside him told him that it was not something small. He got out of bed quickly and moved toward the door, and as he stepped into the hallway, he saw Diane coming out of their mother's room, her face pale and her movements unsteady, as if she had just seen something she could not accept. "Roger, it's Mother," she said, and her voice trembled in a way that made the words feel heavier than they were. "I brought her coffee, and she is not moving. She is dead." For a moment, Roger did not react, because the words did not fit into his mind, and they did not make sense in the quiet morning that had just begun. Then he moved quickly, almost without thinking, and went straight into the room. The curtains were partly open, and the light from outside fell softly across the bed, creating a scene that looked calm at first, almost peaceful, yet something in that stillness felt wrong. Molly lay on the bed in a natural position, one hand resting near her head, her face quiet and without expression, and if someone had looked from a distance, they might have believed she was simply asleep. Roger stepped closer, his breathing slower now, as if he was trying to control himself, and he reached out carefully, touching her arm. The moment his hand made contact, he understood the truth, because her skin was cold and there was no life in it. He pulled his hand back slowly, and a deep silence filled the room, the kind of silence that does not allow denial. On the small table beside the bed, there was a cup of coffee still warm, and next to it stood an empty cup. And although these objects seemed ordinary, they did not belong to a normal morning, because they were part of something that did not yet make sense. Diane stood near the door watching him, her eyes wide and filled with something between fear and disbelief. "I am going to call the doctor," she said quickly, as if action could help her escape the reality in front of her. Roger nodded slowly, though his thoughts were still moving slowly, and he felt as if the world had changed in a way he could not yet understand. He followed her downstairs, and the house that had been quiet moments before now felt different, as if every object had become aware of what had happened. Diane reached the telephone and called the doctor, her voice shaking but clear enough to deliver the message, and when she finished, she stood still for a moment, her hand still near the receiver, as if she did not know what to do next. "It cannot be true," she said softly, more to herself than to Roger. "First father, and now mother." Her voice broke slightly, and she turned away, unable to hold her emotions completely. Roger watched her, and for a moment, he felt a strange mix of emotions that he could not easily explain, because along with the shock and the sadness, there was something else, something quieter but still present, and he realized that a part of him was thinking about what this meant for the future. He did not want to feel that way, and he did not want to admit it, but the thought was there and it made him uncomfortable. He turned away and moved back toward the stairs, because he knew that the others needed to be told, and the reality could not be kept hidden. The doctor arrived sooner than expected, moving quickly into the house with a serious expression, and he went upstairs without delay, leaving Roger and Diane waiting below. The minutes felt longer than they were, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing second, because neither of them knew what to say that could make sense of the situation. When the doctor finally came back downstairs, his face showed concern, and although he spoke calmly, his words carried something that made the moment even more serious. He explained that Molly had died during the night, but there was something unusual about the situation, because she had not been ill, and there was no clear reason for her death. He mentioned the sleeping tablets that she had been taking, and then he paused, as if he was thinking carefully about what to say next. He told them that the bottle of tablets was missing, and that this detail did not fit with what he expected to find, and as he spoke, the situation began to feel less like a simple loss and more like a mystery that needed to be understood. Roger felt a cold sensation move through him, because the idea that something was not right had now taken shape, and it was no longer just a feeling, but a possibility that could not be ignored. Diane listened quietly, her expression changing slightly, as if she was beginning to understand the same thing, yet neither of them spoke immediately, because the meaning of the doctor's words was too heavy to respond to without thought. The doctor then made a decision that changed everything, and he said that he needed to call the police because the situation required further investigation. The word itself seemed to fill the room with a new kind of tension, because it meant that this was no longer just a private family matter, but something that would involve questions, attention, and answers that might be difficult to give. Roger stood still, looking toward the window, where the garden looked exactly as it had the day before, bright and peaceful under the morning light, and for a moment, the contrast between that calm beauty and the reality inside the house felt almost impossible to accept. He thought about his mother, about the house, and about everything that had been said the night before, and slowly, a deeper feeling began to grow inside him, one that was not just sadness, but something closer to fear, because now it was clear that this was not the end of something, it was the beginning of something far more complicated. Chapter 7. Suspicion Everywhere. The news spread quickly through the house, yet instead of bringing the family closer together, it created a distance that was impossible to ignore, because when a sudden death enters a place filled with tension, it does not only bring sadness, it also brings questions, doubts, and quiet fear. The rooms that had once felt warm now seemed unfamiliar, as if every wall was holding a secret, and every person inside carried something they were not ready to share. Roger stood near the window for a long time, watching the garden without really seeing it, because his mind was moving through everything that had happened, from the dinner to the last words spoken by his mother, and although he tried to focus on the present, the past kept returning with a force that made him uncomfortable. Diane moved restlessly through the house, unable to stay in one place, because her emotions refused to settle into one clear feeling, and she shifted between shock, anger, and something deeper that she could not easily explain. She had been the one to find their mother, and the image of that moment stayed in her mind, repeating itself again and again. Yet at the same time, her thoughts moved toward everything that had been said the night before, and she could not ignore the fact that she had spoken words in anger that now felt too close to reality. She tried to push those thoughts away, but they returned each time she allowed her mind to rest, and this made her even more restless because she did not want to face what those words might mean. Jackie, on the other hand, appeared calmer on the surface, but her silence was not empty because it was filled with careful observation and quiet thought. She moved through the house with purpose, preparing tea, arranging small things, and keeping herself busy. Yet her eyes followed every movement around her, and she noticed the way people avoided each other, the way conversations stopped before they could begin, and the way the atmosphere seemed to hold a question that no one wanted to ask directly. She had always tried to keep peace in the family, but now she felt that peace was no longer something she could control, because too many emotions had been left unresolved for too long. Albert sat in the sitting room, his posture heavy, his face serious, and his thoughts focused on the situation in a practical way, because although he felt the shock of Molly's death, his mind also moved toward the consequences that would follow. He thought about Annie, about her illness, and about the need for money that had not disappeared with Molly's death. And although he did not speak these thoughts aloud, they remained close to the surface, shaping the way he looked at everything around him. He had come to the house hoping for help, and now he found himself in a situation that was far more complicated than he had expected, because what had happened did not feel natural, and the idea that something might be wrong made him uneasy. The absence of Molly created a space that could not be filled easily, and in that space, every person began to feel the weight of their own thoughts more clearly. The memory of the dinner returned again and again, and each person remembered different parts of it, different words, different expressions, and each memory carried its own meaning. Roger remembered the argument about the house and the future, and he could not ignore the fact that he had wanted change, even if he had not wished for it in this way. Diane remembered her own words about money and her sharp confidence, and now those words felt different, heavier, as if they carried a responsibility she had not considered before. Albert remembered his request for help and the pressure he had placed on Molly, and although he had spoken calmly, he could not deny that his need had been strong. Even the people outside the family became part of the situation, because their presence in the story added new layers of suspicion that could not be ignored. Peter Hobbs, with his open anger and his clear threat, stood out as someone who had both a reason and an emotion strong enough to act, and his words from the day before now felt more serious than they had at the time. He had lost his job because of Molly, and he had not hidden his feelings about it, which made him an easy figure to suspect. Yet there was also something about him that felt too direct, too obvious, as if his anger was too visible to remain unnoticed. Tom Briggs also entered the thoughts of the family, even though he was not present in the house at that moment, because his connection to the land and his desire for more space made him another person with a clear reason to be involved. He had spoken about the garden, about his need for land, and about his plans for the future, and although his approach had not been aggressive, his intentions were strong, and the possibility that he might benefit from Molly's absence could not be ignored. His name moved quietly through the conversations, sometimes spoken, sometimes only thought, yet always present in the background. As the morning moved forward, the idea that Molly's death might not have been natural began to settle more deeply into the minds of everyone in the house, and with that idea came a quiet shift in the way they looked at each other. Simple actions became more noticeable, small details gained importance, and even the tone of a voice or the timing of a movement seemed to carry meaning. No one said the word directly, but the feeling was there, growing slowly and steadily, until it could no longer be denied. It was no longer just about loss, it was about understanding what had truly happened. And as that realization took shape, the house that had once held a family now held something else, something colder and more uncertain, where every person could be hiding something, and where trust began to feel like a fragile thing that could break at any moment. Chapter 8. The investigation begins. The arrival of the police changed the atmosphere of the house completely, because what had already felt tense and uncertain now became something official and unavoidable, and the quiet space that once belonged to the family was no longer private.
The sound of the cars outside, the movement of unfamiliar people, and the presence of authority filled the house with a new kind of pressure that none of them could escape. Jackie stood near the doorway as the officers entered, watching them carefully, because although she tried to remain calm, she understood that this moment would bring questions that might not have easy answers.
Roger stepped forward to speak to them, his voice steady but controlled, as if he was trying to maintain order in a situation that had already moved beyond his control, while Diane remained slightly behind, observing everything with sharp attention, her eyes moving from one officer to another, as if she was trying to understand what they already knew. The officers moved through the house with quiet efficiency, some going upstairs to examine Molly's room, others remaining below to begin their work, and their presence made every object seem more important, because nothing was just a simple detail anymore. The family was asked to wait together in the sitting room, and as they sat there in silence, the tension between them grew stronger, because now they were not only dealing with their own thoughts, but also with the knowledge that they were being observed, measured, and questioned. No one spoke at first, because the silence itself felt safer than saying something that might later be misunderstood. Yet inside each of them, there was a constant movement of thoughts that refused to slow down. After some time, two detectives entered the room, and their presence brought a different kind of focus, because they did not look around with curiosity, but with purpose. The older one, Inspector Walsh, carried himself with quiet authority, his movements calm but deliberate, while the younger officer, Sergeant Foster, stood beside him with a more open expression, though he remained attentive to everything that was happening. The inspector introduced himself briefly, and then, without wasting time, he explained that Molly's death did not appear to be natural and that sleeping tablets had been involved, which meant that someone had placed them in her drink during the night. The words were spoken clearly, without emotion, yet they carried a weight that settled over the room immediately because they confirmed what no one had wanted to say aloud. Roger reacted first, standing up and offering the use of his father's office for the questioning, because he understood that the process could not be avoided, and he wanted it to move forward in an organized way. The inspector accepted, and one by one, the family members were called into the room, while the others remained outside, waiting, thinking, and trying to guess what was being said behind the closed door. Each person who entered the office carried their own version of the previous night, and each version revealed something different, because the truth was not a single clear story, but a collection of moments, words, and actions that did not always fit together easily. Albert was the first to be questioned, and he spoke about the dinner, about the arguments, and about his own situation with Annie, explaining his need for money in a way that was both honest and careful. He admitted that he had spoken to Molly privately later in the evening, asking again for help, and although he tried to present his actions as reasonable, the inspector listened closely, noting every detail, every pause, and every change in tone. Albert also mentioned hearing someone moving through the house during the night, a small detail that might have seemed unimportant at another time, but now carried a possible meaning that could not be ignored. When Jackie entered the office, her calm expression remained unchanged, yet her answers were precise and thoughtful, as if she had already considered what needed to be said. She explained how the evening had unfolded, how Diane had taken a drink to their mother, and how each person had visited Molly before going to bed. She also spoke about the tablets, explaining that they had been collected earlier in the week, and she mentioned Peter Hobbs, reminding the inspector of his anger and his threat, which added another layer to the situation. The inspector listened carefully, and although Jackie appeared controlled, there were moments when her words revealed small details that seemed to interest him more than others. Roger's turn came next, and his manner was different because although he tried to remain composed, there was a tension in him that was difficult to hide. He spoke about his plans for the house, about his disagreements with his mother, and about the conversation they had shared before she went to sleep. He admitted that he needed money, but he denied any intention of harming her. And while his words were clear, the inspector seemed to pay attention not only to what he said, but also to how he said it, because sometimes the truth is not only in the words, but in the space between them. Diane entered the room with a different kind of energy, because she did not try to hide her emotions, and she spoke openly about the tension in the family, about her own arguments with her mother, and about the people who had been present in the house that night. She mentioned Peter Hobbs and his anger, and she also spoke about Tom Briggs, whose interest in the land had been clear, and although her words seemed direct, there was something in her tone that suggested she was trying to guide the conversation in a certain direction. When the inspector mentioned the missing tablets, her reaction was strong and immediate, and for a moment, the calm control of the room shifted, revealing how close everything was to breaking. As the questioning continued, small details began to form a pattern, and although the full picture was not yet clear, there were signs that the truth was hidden within those details. The empty bottle of tablets, the movements of people during the night, the conversations that had taken place, and the emotions that had been expressed all became pieces of a puzzle that the inspector was quietly assembling. He did not rush to conclusions, and he did not show what he was thinking, yet it was clear that he was moving closer to understanding what had really happened. When the questioning paused, the house fell into silence again, but it was not the same silence as before, because now it was filled with awareness, and every person in that house understood that the situation had changed completely. This was no longer a matter of confusion or uncertainty. It had become a search for the truth, and that truth was somewhere inside the house, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 9: Hidden Truths Revealed. The investigation did not end with the first round of questions, because the answers that had been given were not enough to explain everything. and Inspector Walsh understood that the truth in a case like this is rarely simple or immediate. As the day moved forward and turned into another, he continued his work with quiet patience, following each detail carefully and returning to the house with a clearer sense of direction. When he arrived again, he asked for everyone to gather in the sitting room, and although no one spoke as they took their seats, there was a shared understanding that something important was about to be revealed. The room felt heavy with expectation, and the silence that filled it was not empty, but tense, as if each person was waiting for their own fear to be spoken aloud. Inspector Walsh stood near the window for a moment, looking at each face one by one, and although his expression remained calm, there was a certainty in his eyes that had not been there before. He began to speak slowly, not in a rushed or dramatic way, but with the steady confidence of someone who had already found the answers he needed. He explained that Molly's death had not been an accident, and that the sleeping tablets in her drink had been placed there deliberately, which meant that the person responsible had not acted suddenly, but had made a decision that came from something deeper. His words moved through the room carefully, and with each sentence, the tension grew stronger, because now the truth was no longer hidden behind possibility. He turned first to Albert, speaking about his situation with Annie, about the cost of her care, and about the financial pressure he was facing, and although Albert tried to remain composed, it was clear that his need had been real and urgent. The inspector pointed out that Albert had asked for money more than once, and that he had visited Molly privately on the night of her death. Yet he also made it clear that although Albert had a reason, his actions did not fully connect to the final event, and there were details that did not match. Albert listened in silence, his face serious, because he understood that he was being examined closely, even if he was not being directly accused. The inspector then turned to Diane, and the shift in focus changed the atmosphere again, because her situation carried a different kind of tension. He spoke about her visits, about the money she had received, and about the way she had used her knowledge of the past to influence her mother. He revealed that Diane had often reminded Molly of her husband's death, suggesting that it had not been an accident, and that this had created fear, a fear that had led Molly to continue giving her money. The room reacted quietly to this information, because it showed a side of Diane that had not been fully visible before, and although she did not deny it, her expression changed, revealing a mixture of anger and pain that she could not completely hide. Roger was next, and his reaction was different because he seemed to understand what was coming before the inspector spoke. Walsh explained Roger's financial difficulties, the loss of his job, and his plans for the house and land, and he pointed out that Roger had a strong reason to want change, even if he had not acted on it directly. Roger's face became tense, and he tried to respond, but his words lacked the confidence they had carried before, because now he could see how his own thoughts and desires might appear from another point of view. The inspector paused for a moment, allowing the weight of these revelations to settle in the room, and then he continued, shifting the focus away from the family and toward the others who had been present that night. He spoke about Peter Hobbs, his anger, his loss, and his clear threat, and he acknowledged that Peter had both emotion and reason on his side. Yet he also pointed out that Peter's anger had been too visible, too open, and that his actions had not matched the careful nature of the crime. He then mentioned Tom Briggs, whose interest in the land had been strong, and whose presence in the house had added another layer to the situation. Yet again, the details did not fully connect, and there was something missing that prevented either of them from being the true answer. The room grew quieter as the inspector's words moved closer to the truth, and although no one spoke, there was a shared feeling that the final moment was approaching. Jackie sat still, her posture controlled, her face calm, yet her eyes revealed something that could not be fully hidden, because there was a tension in them that had not been present before. She had listened to everything without interruption, and for a long time, she had appeared to be the most balanced person in the room, the one who wanted peace, the one who tried to hold everything together, Yet now the inspector's attention moved toward her in a way that changed everything. He spoke about the past, about her connection to Tom Briggs, and about a relationship that had once been important to her, a relationship that had not been accepted by her mother. He explained how that rejection had not simply disappeared with time, but had remained, growing quietly beneath the surface, and how the return of Tom Briggs had brought those feelings back with new strength. Jackie's expression changed slowly, and although she did not speak, it was clear that the inspector's words were reaching something inside her that she had tried to keep hidden. The inspector continued, explaining how the events of the night had not been random, but carefully arranged, and how certain actions had been taken to guide attention in specific directions. He described how Peter Hobbs had been brought into the house at the right moment, how his anger had been allowed to be seen by everyone, and how this created a possible explanation that would be easy to believe. He spoke about the tablets, about the missing bottle, and about how it had been placed where it would create suspicion elsewhere. And as he explained these details, the pattern became clearer, forming a picture that could no longer be ignored. Jackie's breathing became slightly uneven, and for the first time, she looked as if she was losing control, because the truth was no longer something distant, but something that stood directly in front of her. When the inspector finally spoke her name in connection with the crime, the room seemed to hold its breath, because although the idea had not been fully formed before, it now felt both shocking and strangely possible at the same time. She stood up suddenly, her voice breaking as she tried to respond, and she spoke about her life, about her feelings, and about everything that had been taken from her. Yet her words did not deny the truth completely, because they carried an emotion that connected too closely with the story that had been revealed. She spoke about love, about the desire to be happy, and about the frustration of being denied that happiness again and again. And although her explanation came from a place of pain, it could not change what had happened. The room remained silent as her words faded, because there was nothing left to say that could return things to what they had been before. The truth had been uncovered, and although it had taken time to reach it, it now stood clearly in front of them all, impossible to ignore and impossible to undo. And in that moment, it became clear that what had happened was not just the result of a single action, but the result of years of emotion, conflict, and desire, all coming together in one final decision that changed everything forever. Chapter 10. Love or Money Decision. The room remained still after the truth had been spoken, and for a long moment no one moved, because sometimes the weight of reality is so strong that even simple actions feel difficult. Jackie stood where she was, her body tense, her eyes no longer calm, and the control she had shown for so long was now gone. The silence around her was not empty, because it carried judgment, shock, and something deeper that could not be easily named. No one stepped forward to defend her, and no one spoke to comfort her, because the truth had created a distance that could not be crossed with words. Inspector Walsh did not raise his voice, and he did not show anger, because his role was not to judge but to reveal. And now that his work had reached its conclusion, he simply allowed the moment to settle. He looked at Jackie with steady attention, giving her the space to speak if she wished. And although she had already said enough to make the truth clear, there was still something inside her that needed to come out. Her voice, when it returned, was not strong, but it carried a depth of emotion that made every word feel real. She spoke about her life in that house, about the years she had spent following rules that were never truly hers, and about the quiet sacrifices that had shaped her into someone who no longer recognized her own desires. She spoke about Tom, about the way she had once seen a future with him, and about how that future had been taken away without her consent, not because it was impossible, but because it did not fit into her mother's idea of what was right. She did not try to hide her feelings anymore, and she admitted that those emotions had stayed with her, growing slowly, becoming stronger each time she was reminded of what she could not have. Her words were not filled with anger alone, because there was also sadness in them, and a sense of loss that had not been given a voice until now. She explained how Tom's return had brought everything back, not just memories, but the feeling that she still had a chance to choose a different life, and how that possibility had been stopped once again when her mother refused to accept it. In that moment, the decision that she had made no longer felt sudden because it had been building for years, shaped by moments that had seemed small at the time but had never truly disappeared. No one interrupted her because her story, although painful, did not change the outcome, and it did not remove the fact that a life had been taken. Diane sat quietly, her expression no longer confident, because the reality in front of her had stripped away the distance she had tried to keep. Roger looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes because he now saw how his own desires had been part of the same world that had led to this moment. Albert remained still, his thoughts turning inward, because even though his need had been real, he could not ignore the way everything had come together. When Jackie finished speaking, there was nothing left to add, and the silence that followed was different from the silence before, because now it carried understanding, even if that understanding did not bring peace. The police stepped forward, not with force but with quiet certainty, and Jackie did not resist when they asked her to come with them. She walked slowly toward the door, her steps steady, as if she had accepted what was coming, and as she passed through the room she did not look back, because there was nothing behind her that she could return to. The sound of the door closing marked the end of something that had once been a family, and although the house remained standing, it no longer held the same meaning. The garden outside was still green and full of life, the trees still moved with the wind, and the sky remained clear, yet everything felt different, because the truth had changed the way it was seen. Inspector Walsh paused for a moment before leaving, looking around the room as if he was considering the story that had unfolded there, and then he spoke quietly, not as an officer, but as someone who had observed something deeply human. "In the end, they will all have the money," he said, his voice calm and thoughtful. "But the question is, what will they have left after that?" No one answered him, because the answer was already present, not in words, but in the silence that filled the space. Money could solve problems, it could create opportunities, and it could change the direction of a life, but it could not repair what had been broken, and it could not bring back what had been lost. The choices that had been made could not be undone, and the consequences would remain, shaping the future in ways that no one could fully predict. The house grew quiet again as the police left, but this time the quiet was not peaceful, because it carried the memory of everything that had happened, and it would not fade easily. Diane stood near the window, looking out at the garden without seeing it, while Roger remained seated, his thoughts moving slowly, as if he was trying to understand something that was too large to grasp all at once. Albert eventually stood and moved toward the door, because life outside the house would continue, and he still had responsibilities that could not wait. And so the story did not end with a simple answer, because it left behind a question that stayed with each person who had lived through it, and that question was not about who had done it, but about why it had happened. It was a question about choices, about values, and about the line between love and money, a line that can become unclear when people begin to lose sight of what truly matters. In the end, the house remained, the garden remained, and life continued, but the meaning of everything had changed, and the cost of that change was something that could never be measured in money. In this story, you learned two powerful things at the same time. From the story side, you saw how money, emotions, and past pain can slowly break relationships, and how one wrong decision can change everything forever. It teaches a deep lesson about choosing love, honesty, and patience over greed and anger. From the English learning side, you learned how real conversations work, how simple sentences can carry deep meaning, and how you can understand and feel English without translating. Now tell me, what did you learn from this story, both in life and in English? Write it in the comments and share your thoughts. If this story helped you feel English, not just understand it, then you are already improving. Keep listening, keep thinking, and keep speaking, because this is how real fluency begins. Write one new sentence from this story in the comments and make it yours. Do not stop here, your journey is just starting. Thanks for watching. and I will see you in the next video.